Well, I just saw that China confirmed this. Trump has talked about it for a while now that he's going to have a meeting, but China waited pretty late
Yeah,
to confirm
yeah,
that. I think for that reason, because I don't think that they're confident that this will be a good idea
no,
until very last minute,
no,
right? So it shows that there is no trust. All right, that just.
no,
But
exactly.
before we
I mean,
got to
normally, when two leaders like Trump and Xi
Mhm.
agree to meet, the thing is announced simultaneously.
Yeah, yeah.
What Trump, he did this with the Budapest summit and he
Mhm.
did this with the Alaska summit. He announced it first
Yeah.
before the other side had
Uh-huh.
agreed.
Yeah.
And of course, we saw what happened in Alaska. And he did the same with China about the
Mhm.
meeting with Xi Jinping. He announced it first and made it appear as if the summit meeting had already been agreed, when I am sure it had not been. I
Mhm.
think that the Chinese wanted the meetings to happen between her and Bessent
Mhm.
before they agreed to the meeting.
Yeah.
And they wanted to see where it was all going. Now that there's been the reports brought back to Beijing, and now that it's been discussed there,
Mhm.
China is able to confirm the meeting. But they're going to go into the meeting very, very thoroughly prepared. They'll have every point ready, and we'll see how the meeting goes.
Yeah, and then I just feel right now you can't trust anything the US officials say. Right? Bessent claimed that China agreed to postpone this rare earth mineral control for a year. In return, the US would drop this 100% tariffs. And of course, you send me that link, right? That the,
Yeah.
the Chinese spokesperson, the foreign ministry spokesperson pretty much denied, any
Yeah.
of those things. I mean, it's hard for
Yes.
me to believe that's what they agreed to, but Bessent just
Yes.
went out to said that, which is
Yes.
again lie. But I guess they do that all the time, right? They just get ahead of themselves and claim that they have some kind of victory in a way, and then waiting for kind of like force it upon China or something, right? I
Well,
don't know.
absolutely. They do. You're absolutely right. They do this all the time. They constantly oversell, over promote the breakthroughs that they're supposed to be achieving. I mean, we see the Gaza ceasefire already been
Yeah.
breaking down.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
They do this all the time. But of course, there is a sinister side to this, because what they're trying to do is that they're trying to shape they announced that there's a meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping going to happen
Mhm.
before the Chinese have agreed. But that puts pressure, that's intended to put pressure on the Chinese to agree. They announced that China has to agree to delay Earth's
Mhm.
regulations for a whole year. Probably that's something the Americans want to discuss, but by implying that the Chinese have already agreed
Agreed.
to
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
you could see that. I mean, it's the sort of thing that. By the way, it's not just Trump who behaves. This is the point I
Mhm.
want to make. It's not just like this. I've had many dealings with the Americans many times. American
Mhm.
companies, American businesses have had to experience many times. Away from a meeting,
Mhm.
you've agreed on a few points. They come back and they imply you've agreed on every point.
Mhm.
And yeah, and they then go around phoning up everybody and telling everybody, look, we've made the
Mhm.
breakthrough, we've agreed on all the big points. And then that puts you in a very difficult position, well, potentially a very difficult position. I got used to it, so I was no longer embarrassed by it anymore. But in which you have to deny
Mhm.
that what the Americans are saying is true. But it is very much the style of negotiations that the Americans like to engage in. And it's actually deeply frustrating. And I can see that it works within the United States, over real estate deals or Wall Street deals or whatever, but it doesn't work with China.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that Americans find very difficult to get.
Well, I don't think even working in the United States. In the Empire of AI, this book, they apparently Sam Altman is like that. He would talk to
Mm.
different board members for different issues, and then he would
Yeah,
announce that they agreed that,
yeah,
which they didn't.
yeah.
And that's what
Yeah.
angered the board members. So now he would tell one board member saying so and so already agreed on this one, and then he would tell somebody else, oh, we agreed, blah blah. And then the board members, they got meeting, get together themselves, they realized this is not what happened. That's why he was briefly, remember, the board briefly fired him. That's the reason that he just constantly make up stories about the board members, what they agreed to.
It's been done to me. I mean, as I said, I mean, I don't know how people in America learn to do this, but it's something that is very typical of American business. I haven't actually had any direct dealings with Chinese companies, but I'm sure that they do not work in this way. I cannot imagine that they do. I'm sure from everything I've heard from other people, from the things the Russians say, they're extremely careful. They go through everything bit by bit, point by point. They're totally straightforward. And sometimes they can be in private, they can be very, very direct, apparently. I mean, Chinese are famously polite people, but that doesn't mean that, if they have to, they won't be direct and to the point as well. So it's a completely different understand.
Yeah. Sometimes the Chinese people can be very straightforward, very direct. For example, I mean, people will say, "Oh, I haven't seen you for a while. You gained some weight." People will say that. Very straightforward.
I've heard. I remember my brother-in-law has lived in China for many years, and he's living in Hong Kong at the moment. But I mean, he said this to me many, many times. That yes, they're very polite, but they're also very straightforward, and very direct as well.
You need to lose some weight or something like that, which we would never say that in the West. Yeah. Yes. Okay, before we get into this whole detail about Trump's trip and the upcoming meeting, can you explain a little bit about the Plaza Accord happened in 1985? Because it is a little bit similar circumstances, right? That there was a huge deficit the U.S. feel not comfortable with, so they negotiated with multiple countries. Can you explain the background and what they achieved?
Yes, the key country, of course, was Japan, though other Asian countries, especially of that time, were involved. So the United States, in some respects, was in a somewhat similar situation to the one that it is in today, in that there was concerns that the American economy, which relative to the rest of the world, of course, in 1985 was much, much bigger than it is now. And America had a much, much bigger share of world manufacturing and industrial production. But anyway, there was a certain worry at that time, a widespread worry, actually. America was starting to fall behind. There was concerns that Japan running an increasingly large trade surplus with the United States, that the Japanese economy had been growing very fast from the 1950s and was, well, not perhaps quite approaching America's in size, but was becoming uncomfortably big from an American point of view. And importantly, that Japan was starting to pull ahead of the United States in certain areas of technology, including, by the way, this will surprise people, we're talking about 1985, though, semiconductors. That Japan at that time, believe it or not, had quite a substantial industry in this field. So the Americans did all the things that we see today. They said that they basically threatened restrictions on Japanese imports. They started to put all sorts of political pressures. Of course, Japan being an ally of the United States, there were many political leaders in Japan who were anyway deeply receptive to American pressures. That is something which is different today. I mean, today that exists far less. So they met in the Plaza Hotel in New York. Plaza Hotel, famous hotel in New York, doesn't exist as a hotel anymore, I believe. It's been into apartment buildings, but never mind. Apartment building, never mind. Anyway, they all met, and basically the deal was done. And the deal was that Japan would open up its economy to American finance, so that American money could start to become involved, that there would be lifting of restrictions on American investments in Japan, in America's ability to buy stocks in Japanese financial institutions. That was mainly one of the major factors in it. And of course, the other thing was that Japan would allow its currency to appreciate against the dollar, so that there was widespread claims, probably true, that Japan was managing its currency in order to remain competitive, and Japan was expected to end that, and as I said, to open up its economy. The Americans always like to say, "Open up your economy."
Yeah.
This is the other thing, and move it towards a more consumption-based model. I mean, it's exactly the same rhetoric that you hear today. Anyway, they did all of that. So that was Japan basically capitulated. It agreed to all of that. And the immediate result was an absolute runaway money poured into from the United States and around the world. And as financial controls in Japan were lifted, and as planning controls in Japan were basically done away with. So there was a massive real estate boom that diverted investment away from the productive part of the economy, manufacturing, into real estate. The yen rose, the stock market rose, the Japanese trade surplus with the United States fell. It all, of course, ended in a crash. The crash left a massive pile of debt. But by this point, the changes that were done to Japan's economy were so extensive that it was impossible to go back to the earlier model. And Japan has been basically stagnating ever since. So it destroyed the whole industrial investment boom that Japan had successfully achieved in the period after the Second World War. And one of the effects is that in industry after industry, where Japan had a position of enormous strength and even leadership, shipbuilding, semiconductors, those sort of things, Japan today is the force that it once was. I know that in China, the story of the Plaza Accord is very well known. And very, very widely discussed, as it should be. And I read articles in the Chinese media in which people say that China must never make the same mistake that Japan did. And I don't think they will.
Well, probably that explains that currently what the United States is trying to do is to do what they did to Japan, to China, right? Basically want China to capitulate. And also explains why China cannot capitulate, because the cautionary tale is right in front of them, right? The Japanese the people called it lost decades or what have you, followed the Plaza Accord. So now that brings us to the upcoming. So first of all, Bessent and He Lifeng, they had a meeting in Malaysia. Do you think that was we don't get much information. I mean, we can't just trust what Bessent said, right? So China said it hasn't said much, so we don't know a whole lot. But what's your sense on that meeting?
I get the Americans are overstating things. I mean, Bessent comes along. He says, it's a massively constructive meeting. Everything's gone wonderfully well. We've got the Chinese to agree to all kinds of things. I then go and look at what He said and other Chinese officials. They're far more reticent about this. From what I can tell, my own sense is that what we're probably going to see is an extension of what was basically agreed back in September in Madrid, with a few little additions. You know, China might agree to buy a few more soybeans, things of that kind. In other words, of any real substance. And what really needs to happen, and we've discussed this in previous programs, is that if there is going to be an agreement, a proper trade agreement, it must be negotiated properly. I think that is what China was expecting after Madrid, that the United States would appoint a negotiating team and that China would have its own negotiating team ready, and there would be a number of big rounds of negotiations, and there would be a proper structured process, and we would eventually end up, after much discussion and whatever, we would end up with a proper trade deal. From what I can understand, nothing like that is happening. And yes, China will meet, Xi Jinping will meet with Trump. Why wouldn't he? I mean, you still want to maintain contact with the US president. I think he'll be very, very careful. He will try to explain things as he always does. You go to the Chinese foreign ministry's readouts, and they look like tutorials. See, trying to educate the Americans into how to approach these things, and be an awful lot of that. And the Chinese will push very hard on Taiwan, as I've said. And I mean, when I say push very, to stress again, I mean, what they will basically say to the Americans is, stick to what you've already promised. You promised all the way back in the 1970s and ever after. I mean, that's all we are asking you to do. We're not asking you for more than that. We are talking about that which we already agreed about long ago. But I think that Xi will want to explain that to the Americans. And I doubt that we will get much more. So we will get this probably for another year, maybe, a trade pause. And a trade pause for a year, by the way, is a win for China. Because remember, it is the Americans who embarked on this tariff madness, not the Chinese. So it'll be a win for China. China can use that year to diversify its trade even further, which will, years' time, put it in an even stronger position than the one in which it's in now. It will get Trump out of the problems that he's created for himself, but it will not be the final and conclusive end to this problem. I think that, and in a year's time, I would not be surprised if we're having a similar conversation then.
Well, Trump said that U.S. is going to have a good deal with China. This is what he said, I think, 2 days ago or something. So, Wall Street Journal did have something. They said that, according to their source, that the U.S. would drop or at least reduce significantly the fentanyl-related tariffs for Chinese, lots of the Chinese chemicals, ingredients and stuff like that. They use this fentanyl thing to basically to charge more tariffs. I mean, it's the fentanyl is a U.S. problem, but Trump just always blame China.
Well, they present as a concession. Something, a concession, when in fact it's a retreat. I mean, they imposed these tariffs on a completely phony pretext. Now finding themselves under significant pressure because of the rare earths, the Nexpedia, which, by the way, are creating a crisis in the European car industry. There's talk that Volkswagen's production is now essentially at a standstill. So they've created all of these problems. And so, they're saying, you can buy a few soybeans and we'll reduce these tariffs and pretend to everybody that you're not exporting or you're doing more about the fentanyl thing. The fentanyl thing has nothing to do with China. I've looked into this, by the way. I've actually asked people I know who know all about this question. If you want to know where the big source of fentanyl is, it's not very far from Britain. The people who basically run it are in the Netherlands, just to say.
That's right. Yeah. Not that you're saying it. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, synthetic drugs and all of that, basically, that's the point of origin of it. Obviously, in the Latin American states, that a lot of the cartels have moved heavily into this, but they've done that because they've obtained the know-how from the Dutch. And The Netherlands, by the way, has a very, very organized crime networks, and they all interconnect with each other. Anyway, I don't want to get into this. That's a sidetrack issue. The point, it has nothing to do with China. If you knew anything about Chinese history and the way the Chinese feel about the drug trafficking altogether, you would know that it is inconceivable that China, of all countries, would be involved in this sort of thing.
Well, their argument, I saw some people saying, well, because China has, its own history with the drug, it is inconceivable for them to believe China cannot do more to help the United States. You see, that's their argument.
Yeah, it is their argument, and I've seen and heard that argument, and it is based on such a complete misunderstanding, such a profound failure to understand how the Chinese feel and think about these matters. That, I mean, when I hear people talking that way, I just throw up my hands in despair and say, just coming up with one reason after another to blame China for this problem.
Now, the other thing, according to Wall Street Journal, was that they're going to reduce the port fees for both sides, because now China also charges, U.S., not just the U.S. made ships, but U.S. owned, invested companies' ships. So that's another thing.
And again, an American retreat. I mean, again, we go back to Mr. Bessent. I mean, he talks about Li Changgang, I can't remember his name, Chinese official who was deranged in some way because he brought up the fact that the Americans imposed these fees on Chinese-built ships that came to American ports. It's the Americans who started this thing. That was an outrageous thing to do. I mean, that wasn't about trade. That was a straightforward attack on China's shipbuilding industry. Of course, the Chinese pushed back hard on it. China then takes retaliatory measures. The Americans retreat, as they have to. And then again, they said, we come to some kind of a wonderful, good deal with the Chinese about this. So as I said, you pretend that you've come to an agreement when in fact you're retreating. You're stepping back from that totally unacceptable thing which you previously did.
Yeah, and then one more thing is Jensen Huang of NVIDIA. He's going to South Korea as well. And he said that Trump asked him to come. Maybe there's something there as well. So we will see. But it just seems like, I mean, I'm still not too confident that there will be substantial agreement. It's just.
Well, can I just say something? And I'm not very confident. I'm not going to be confident again that there will be an agreement. Isn't this interesting? So he comes, he meets Trump. Trump says, look, you can have your company back so that we can start getting all of these chips. What do the Dutch say? I mean, what exactly? If we get into that kind of scenario, and why else would Trump want this man in South Korea and want to meet with him if it were not to say something like that? I mean, this meeting is even going to happen. I mean, the Dutch are going to look total fools.
Yeah. Well, they are in a very difficult situation right now, right? What should they do? I mean, China pretty much moved on. China already started to contact some of the major automobile manufacturers saying we can start negotiating the chips now. So whatever the Dutch government took the next period, that part eventually will become irrelevant. I mean,
well, absolutely. Well, I mean, the Dutch are in a very difficult position, which they put themselves in. They should have said to the Americans, look, this is a perfectly legal company trading in a legal way. It isn't any rules. This whole business about national security is a phony one, and it will not interfere in the Netherlands' trade deals and business dealings with another country, which is China and the nationals of that country. If the Netherlands had taken that position, which is a simple one, any self-respecting country would have taken, it would not be in this difficult position now.
It's Trump. I don't know. Trump is very good at first of all making up stories to create bargaining chips. Right, like the fentanyl is created out of thin air, almost like. And then regarding the chips, I guess the whole idea is for high-end chips, they banned the selling to China, and now Jensen Huang, NVIDIA is in a difficult situation because they really don't want to lose the Chinese market. That's
No.
probably part of the reason Trump trying to
Yeah.
push for it back to China or something. That's why
Yeah.
he was asked to go to South Korea. And then the low end, the middle tier chips now is being disrupted because of the whole Dutch
Mm.
government dysphoria.
Yeah.
So it seems like it just one debacle after another. It's just nonstop. Whatever they're trying to
It
do.
is. It is. Well, it is. What Trump is a very manipulative individual. I mean, he's very manipulative. He always looks for weak points. He tries to exploit them. He doesn't ever really think these things. He doesn't in a straightforward way. Now, what you find with people like that, I've encountered in my life, by the way. I mean, that is, if you did the kind of work I used to do, you'd meet them every day. What you find with people like that is that at the beginning they can win, but when people figure them out, which they do very, very fast, what they find is that they can't win at all anymore because nobody any longer trusts them.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest challenge for negotiating with the United States right now. I just don't think anybody trusts United States.
No.
How do you work with somebody like that?
Well, quite exactly.